Jared Polin, FroKnowsPhoto.com, and this is the user guide for the Canon EOS R10. Now, if you just purchased it and you want to learn how to set up your camera, you've come to the right place, because I'm going to show you how I would personally set this camera up if I was taking it out into the real world. Now, if you don't own this camera yet, being that I just said real world, I've taken this out into the real world, and there are videos that are linked down below that show me using this out there and give my opinion on it. But if you already purchased it, congratulations. Now, let me show you how to set up this camera. We're going to start with the outside of the camera. We're going to move into the menus for stills. We're going to get into the menus for video, and then we're going to show you what it looks like when you look through the viewfinder and explain to you what all of the different icons are, or most of the icons. You can look at this video as if it's your user guide without having to go into the manual, but sometimes you may want to go back to the manual if I don't touch on something that's subtle and nuanced. But I'm going to hit the highest level things that I think you should be thinking about, and that's where we're going to start. The first thing we're going to start with is running you through the outside of the camera. Things like, where does the battery go? Where does the memory card go? How to put the lens on, how to take the lens off, just the very basics. So if this is something that you already know, you might want to skip ahead, but if not, let's start with how to put the battery in and where it goes. I know a lot of this is simple, but this is the type of content that I didn't have when I first started, because, you know, the internet was kind of young in 1994, that I couldn't really figure out how to do these things by going on the internet. But now you have this. So fundamentals and basics, they're important, so let's start right here. Down here, flip this door open. This one isn't spring-loaded like some other cameras, so it just flops like this. You open it, here is your battery, move this switch, and it's going to pop this battery out right here. Now, this is a smaller battery that Canon offers. It's the only type of battery you can take for this camera, and I recommend that you get at least two. You know, one that it comes with, and then purchase another one. I'm a big fan of the authentic Canon batteries. Make sure you buy the authentic ones. This one has a little hologram on the bottom to show you that it's authentic Canon. Do not buy third-party batteries. They don't work as well, not even just in my opinion, they just don't work as well. Some people might tell you that third-party batteries, they're just as good as the original. They're not. Stick to the original, spend the extra few bucks, just because you don't want it to die on you in a situation where you're actually trying to shoot something, and then all of a sudden the other battery just dies because it loses its charge. So there's only one way you can put this in. Actually, you can put it in backwards and wrong, but it doesn't push down and get stuck. See that? It doesn't go in. So you just take it out, flip it around, put it in. You do that, now it's clipped in there. You would shut the door and be good to go. Now, on this camera, your SD card is in the battery compartment, so it's in the same exact spot. Right now, you just press it to take it out. Here it is. You can see that the notch is in the top right. There's even a little picture here that shows you how to put it in. You can't really put it in backwards. So you put it in like this, pop it down, shut the door, and you're good to go. Now, with memory cards, I like to have multiple memory cards, because if you fill one up or one goes bad, I always like to have backups. I'm big into redundancy. So if you get a 64 gigabyte card or a 32 gigabyte, there's 32, 64, 128 SD cards. They're not that expensive today. Try to stick with some of the more reputable brands, which you may not even know who the reputable brands are, but you got companies like ProGrade Digital, you've got SanDisk, you've got Lexar. Those are the type of companies that I've worked with for a long time, and those are the ones that I recommend using their cards. There's other ones like Kingston and Delkin. They're not terrible either. They're all going to get the job done, but if you've never heard of a name or it's super duper cheap, I wouldn't trust it, because you don't spend all this money on a camera just to have it fail because you use a really cheap memory card. So ProGrade Digital, SanDisk, and Lexar, those are the three that I would recommend if you're gonna pick up an SD card. All right, so the next thing we're gonna talk about right here is how to take the lens off the camera as well as put it on, because when you buy this camera, it's separate from the lens, it doesn't ship together. Now, a lot of people might be scared to do this. I was scared when I started and was a new photographer and had to change lenses. I thought I was gonna ruin something and mess something up. You can mess something up, but this is how you do it. You see this right here? This is a lens release button. I'm going to hold the lens while pressing this release button, turn it towards me, and take it off. Now, right here is your image sensor. This is your, I almost called it a CCD, but it's a CMOS. This is your image sensor. You don't want to leave it exposed like this for too long. If you point it up like this and it's raining and you get rain in here, that might, you know, put a damper on some of your photos. So I recommend that you aren't in a dusty environment, or it's not super windy, or if it's windy, you put the wind to your back and you change lenses by basically tilting the camera down. Also make sure that the camera is off when you go ahead and do this. So how do we put it on? You see this red line right here on the lens? We've got a red line right here, and we have a red line right here on the body. We go ahead and we line them up. Boom, like this. And I turn away from me and it clicks. That's how you put it on. Turn away, clicks. It also depends on what hand you do it in, but yeah. Off, line up the red dots, click it in, and that's how you change your lens. So now let's flip around to the top of the camera to show you what we have here. We've got the on and off switch. Steven, do we know what the on and off switch does?
Turns it off and on.
Yeah, good job, Steven. Turns it off and on. Flick of a switch, boom. We're now on. We're now off. It's that simple. I know it's simple, but it's always good to just say it. So this dial right here is custom set to control your aperture right off the bat. When the camera is fresh, you're gonna change the aperture by turning this left and right. Now you can change this. We'll talk about setting custom function buttons later and how you do that, because sometimes you wanna map buttons differently for your use to quickly get into certain settings and make changes. We'll talk about that later. This is your command dial. So right now it's set to manual, but when you get it, it's most likely going to be in green mode, which is auto. So I'm not a big fan of shooting in auto. Also, if you're set to auto, you don't actually get all the full controls of the menu system, because you're shooting in auto. The camera's like, you know what? I'm going to make all the decisions for you. That may be a place that you start in for a while because you're brand new and you just want to take pictures. Auto is going to be okay. If you want to be a photographer, you should aspire to get into manual mode because you want to control the camera. But it's perfectly fine when you're starting out to shoot in auto. Perfectly fine. Next, we've got FV. That's basically full-on auto again, but gives you a little bit more controls. You can go into the menu systems and make some tweaks. You have that. P is program. It doesn't stand for professional. You're not a professional when you go into P. TV is shutter priority, meaning you set the shutter speed and the camera's gonna set everything else for aperture and ISO. AV is aperture priority. You set the aperture. The camera's gonna go ahead and set the shutter speed and ISO. Manual is where I live. Bulb is a setting where when I press the shutter and hold my finger down, the shutter's gonna stay open as long as my finger's pressed down, and then I take my finger off, the shutter's going to close. That's where you're gonna use that if you're gonna try and shoot lightning, or yeah, you're trying to capture lightning. That's one of the places that you end up using bulb. Then we've got C1 and C2. These are custom settings that you can set. Say if you shoot indoors and outdoors and you move quickly, you could set one to basic settings for indoors and the other for basic settings for outdoors, so that you could just quickly make those changes and be in those settings quicker. Next, we've got what are called creative filters. I personally don't use creative filters. I do, I take my pictures, and if I need to do anything, I do it in the computer. But if you wanted to shoot monochrome or do some other things that the camera has preset, that's where you would go to. Scene modes. Scene modes are like if I'm gonna shoot mountains, or I'm gonna shoot portraits, or I'm gonna shoot landscapes, which is like shooting mountains, or sports, or fireworks. They have all different, or you're shooting a party. They have different programs that set the camera for those specific settings, for those scenes. Now, it doesn't mean that it's going to be perfect every time, but for certain situations, it's like, oh, well, the shutter speed doesn't need to be fast for landscapes, so it gives priority to something else. Those are okay to use when you're first starting out. And then we're back to auto. But for now, just going to put it back in manual for when we go through the menu system. Let me jump in here real quick because I want to show you FroPack 3 in action on this photo taken with the Canon EOS R10. Now, if you're new to editing your photos and you want to quickly see a bunch of different options that are done for you, we created these presets, so check this out. We're gonna start with Zoolander. With one click, it looks great. Then we've got Prestige Worldwide. That looks fantastic, followed by November Rain. Then we've got Eckert, followed by Capone, Almost Famous, and Fifth Element. But I want to go all the way up to Pack 1 because I want to show you what happens when we use Skittles. Watch this, Skittles. That's how amazing Skittles looks with just one click. So look, if you're new to editing, you want to speed up your raw workflow or give yourself a great starting point, we created 15 custom Lightroom presets that you can check out right now at froknowsphoto.com/FroPack3. While you're over there, you can play with the sliders to see the befores and the afters, and if you decide to pick them up right now, they are currently on sale. Or if you want to get the triple play bundle, which includes Pack 1 that has Skittles, you can save even more when you grab the bundle. Now, let's get back to the video. So moving over here, this is our record button. So if we're going to shoot video, we want to start the video, we press record. We want to stop the video, we press record again. Now, this is lock button. The lock button is going to lock certain functions so that you don't accidentally hit them. I never lock anything when I'm using the camera. I don't think I'm going to accidentally change something, so I might see if we can remap this button to something else later to use something that you might use more often. Now, we showed you that this is for your aperture. This one right here, this wheel, is for your shutter speed. You can swap these and change them, but I don't really think you should. I think that you'll get used to it the way that it is. So shutter speed left, shutter speed right, either way you go, it's gonna change your exposure. Next, we've got something that says MFN. That stands for multi-function button. Well, it doesn't stand for multifunction button, it stands for multifunction. So you hit this button and it brings up either on the back of the screen or in your viewfinder a lot of quick menus that you can get into. You want to change your ISO quickly, you want to change other settings like your focusing modes, you can do it right there. It's quick. It's really meant for when you're looking through the camera with your eye up to the viewfinder, that if you need to change something, you hit that button and then you make the change. It's really simple. It's not going to change you as a person though. So if you want to make a change as a person, you got to dig deep and figure that out on your own. Shutter button. This is your shutter button. It's how you focus, it's how you take pictures. So if you want to focus, you press the button halfway down. It's springy, you'll feel it. Press it halfway. All the way is when you take a picture. If you hold your finger down on it and you're in continuous shooting mode, you're going to continuously shoot photos. We'll talk more about that when we get into how to make those settings work. Around here on the top of the camera, this is a hot shoe. It's called a hot shoe, but now it's also called a digital hot shoe because it's digital. There's a lot of different accessories you can get that are controlled or can pass information from the accessory directly through the hot shoe because it's a digital hot shoe, and I'll explain more when we get into audio recording. But yeah, digital hot shoe, good to have. Right here, these two dots, these are your microphones. I'm pretty sure that these three dots over here are a little speaker to play back some of the audio. Underneath the electronic viewfinder, well, since I said electronic viewfinder, this is your electronic viewfinder. Let me show you something right here. You see this little sensor next to it? Watch what happens. See that? It turns your screen off and turns the electronic viewfinder on. So this is a proximity sensor that's going to change. It's going to turn off the screen or turn the screen back on as your eye goes up to it. This is your electronic viewfinder. An electronic viewfinder is basically a little TV screen that shows you everything that your camera sees. Back in the day, we had optical viewfinders, meaning you actually saw straight through it and saw optics, light. Now you're seeing a digital representation of what the camera sees. I love electronic viewfinders. It's the best thing since sliced bread because you can see your exposure, you can see your menus, you can see your images, you can do so much with it, and I love electronic viewfinders. Underneath, you have your diopter. If you wear glasses or you just want to get it a little sharper or because your eyes are off a little bit, focus on something at a distance, make sure it's nice and sharp, and then move that diopter until it looks sharp to your eyes. So if you wear glasses or you don't wear glasses, I wear glasses now, but I don't wear glasses when I shoot photos, so I always change my diopter to try and work best for me, so it's nice and sharp. Right here, this is your LCD screen. See this? It's touchscreen. I can touch things, unlike MC Hammer. It's funny, right, Steven? I don't say it every time. I don't say it every time in user guides. You wouldn't know if this is your first one, but I actually say it every time. It's funny. Anyway, it's a touch screen that flips out and rotates. See, we can flip it out, rotate it, close it. If you're traveling, you can close it. I've luckily, knock on wood, never broken one of these, especially back in the day when you couldn't close it. But when I'm traveling and not using it, I go ahead and close it. Might as well take that extra precaution. So I turn that off. Down here, we've got the play button. The play button is used to play back your images. It's simple. Right here, we've got the, what button is this, Steven?
Oscar the Grouch.
That's right, it's the Oscar the Grouch button. It's the trash can. If you want to delete images on the camera, which I don't recommend doing, I don't actually do it ever. I rarely, if ever, delete images on the camera. So that's what you have. You would press down on this up. This one goes up, down, left, and right. And it's a command dial. That's how you would do that. Around the command dial, these are just other custom settings that are already preset, like ISO is already set right here, so you would press up to change your ISO. We've got your shooting speed mode, you would hit left, as well as timer. In the middle, I have to look close because it's really small. That's your Q and your set button. Think of it as your OK button or enter button, and then the Q brings up another menu. Watch this. I hit this, custom menu comes up on the screen right here, and then you would just touch what you need and make changes. So turn the camera back off once again, and then flash control. So if you want to get into flash controls, which you're probably not going to do anyway, you would just hit to the right. Now, a lot of these buttons we can custom map and make changes later, but for now, they're set to some pretty good things. Info button just cycles through info on the screen, whether you're shooting images or you're reviewing images, it's gonna change through the different settings. Let me jump in here real quick and say, if you'd like me to send you a free guide to capturing motion in low light situations, just look for this orange box over on phronosphoto.com, put your name, email address in it, hit send it, and I'm gonna send you that guide for free. Moving up the camera a little bit, we've got another button, a checkerboard button. I really don't use this very often. I remap it to something else for my usage, but it does have a sub function. That's why it's printed right here. This is a magnifying glass. So when you're reviewing your images, you can zoom in on it by pressing this button. There's a star button right here. Again, another button that I remapped to something that is actually usable for me because this doesn't do anything for me. We've got our AF on. This is a button that you could use for back button focus. I do not use back button focus myself, as our cameras just focus extremely well with the one button up front, but you have that. You could remap that if you want as well. This is a nice option that Canon has put on this camera. This is a joystick, so you could use this to go through the menu system. You can press it in, is another way to do your OK or set button, or you can use it to move focusing points on the screen. If you're gonna take more control of your focusing points, you would go ahead and do that. All the way over here on the left of the camera, this is your menu button. This brings up your menu, simple, self-explanatory. Back to the top of the camera. This is one of the only cameras that Canon makes at this point where you pop up the flash. You pop down the flash. Now, it doesn't auto pop up. Back in the day, the flashes used to auto pop up when you need them. If you need a little bit of flash. Now, this flash is gonna be good for about 10 feet. It's really not gonna light things at a distance. If you're shooting in a stadium, don't pop up the flash because the stadiums already have good light. The flash is all it's gonna do is light up the bald person in front of you or the person with the mullet, and then they're gonna be in, like, they'll be exposed perfect, but the stadium won't. So don't use the flash in those situations. If you're taking pictures of friends around a table, then you're gonna pop up the flash and do that. It's just really meant for just a little bit of light with something that's 8 to 10 feet away. Flipping now to the bottom of the camera, we already saw that we put our card and battery right here. This is your tripod mount. So if you're gonna get a tripod or a gimbal or a selfie stick or anything, it's gonna screw in right here. Moving around to the side of the camera, this is where we have our inputs. We've got an HDMI input, we've got a USB input, a microphone input, and we have a remote input. You just move these rubber doors out of the way like this, and then put them back in, self-explanatory. Everything is right there. The other thing here is you have a USB port. This is a powered USB port, so you can plug a USB-C charger into here to give extra juice to your camera. That's always nice when you're traveling and you just want to make sure your batteries are filled up. Just plug it in, it's going to charge, so it's always good to have that option. Moving back around to the front of the camera, we've got this little LED light here that lights up. It's a focus assist light beam. I turn this off because it's a distraction to have this orange light that pops on and people are seeing it. They're like, what is that? And so I turn that off so it's not a distraction. Now, there's one more button here. This is actually it's a button and a switch. It says AF and manual. If you want to switch to manual focus, which you're rarely going to do, you go ahead and flick that switch into M. You want to get back into auto, you just switch it back to auto. Now, listen to me here, because I've made this mistake before. I've taken my camera out, I'm like, my camera's not working, it's not focusing. And I'm like, oh, snap. I either have the lens in manual or this switch was switched by accident to manual. And so just check first to make sure that it's on autofocus if it's not focusing. And there's also a button in here that you can custom map that you just press and change it to what you want it to be. So I believe that is the outside of the camera. We've hit everything. I know it's basic, I know it's simple, but now we're gonna jump into the menu system and how I would set it up straight out of the box. Now let's go through the menu system and how I would personally set it up straight out of the box. Before we do that, you see this box right here? This is called an Atomos. This is recording it's recording the menus so that you can see them and see exactly what I'm doing so we can do it together. Now what this does is it turns off my ability to touch the screen, but you'll have the ability to touch the screen. So don't forget, you can just touch the menu system and make changes, or use the different arrows like this, or turn dials to make changes. For this, I can't do the touch screen, so I'm gonna walk you through these menu systems. So the first thing I did here was I hit menu. It opens this up. You can see there's the red menu for camera, and then it has 10 different folders. It's real easy to get used to this. It's laid out really well. So here in number one, we've got image quality. Currently it's set to large, and that's for JPEG. I personally shoot RAW. As you can see, my shirt says I shoot RAW. If you want to get an I shoot RAW shirt, go to store.froknosphoto.com. You can pick one up for yourself to show the world that you shoot RAW. I'm going to explain the differences here because this is something new possibly for you. RAW is uncompressed. It's more data. It takes up more space on your memory card, but it's more information, and more information means more control for you to edit in post-production. It's just better to have the RAW file because I started shooting in 2002 digital, and I didn't know what RAW was, but I shot it. And I can go back to those files today and make them look even better today than I could back then, and I still have all of that raw data. JPEGs are compressed. Basically what the camera does is it takes pictures, it takes that raw data, and it throws out what it thinks it doesn't need and then compresses it into a JPEG. JPEGs are what are called a baked file. So once something is done, it's much harder to make a change. Say you shot in black and white, you're not going to be able to get that color back if you shot that in JPEG. If you shot it in RAW, you have the raw data, you can go back to the color data, and you're good to go. I recommend shooting RAW. At the beginning, I recommend shooting RAW plus JPEG because you may not want to edit the RAW files now and take the time to do that, but as you get better, you're going to start to understand that as you take control of your files and your images, you're going to like the results much better. So, RAW, I'm going to go over here to RAW. I'm not gonna do C-RAW, which is a smaller RAW file. I want the most data. So I turn that over to there, and with JPEG, I'm gonna go ahead and go over to large. I want large. I want the largest JPEG file that I can get. You can always dumb down, you can't dumb up. And then to lock this in, we just hit set and OK. See how it says set OK? You can touch that on the screen or just hit set OK. Dual pixel RAW is not something that I use, so I leave it disabled. Some of these things I'm not going to go into super detail about because they're just things that I don't use and I don't think you should use. But dual pixel RAW is this option where it basically takes two RAW files. I know I'm explaining it. And then you have to use their proprietary software. It's not worth using. Now, still image aspect ratio is something to think about. Your camera captures in what's called 3:2 aspect ratio. That's taking advantage of the entire image sensor. You're going to get the full image sensor capture there. 4:3 is going to be more like the old school TVs, if you remember those. 16:9 is more for like cinematic look. I don't recommend taking pictures in 16:9. It just, in my opinion, doesn't look good. 1:1 is square. Now remember how I said JPEG and RAW do different things? If you shoot RAW and you shoot 4:3 or 16:9 or 1:1, you'll still have all of the data from the 3:2 aspect ratio that you can go back to. You can hit uncrop and you will have all of that data. If you do it in JPEG, you are screwed and locked in. Number 2, exposure compensation. I leave this set right to where it's set right now. I don't mess with that at all. ISO speed settings. We're gonna go in here just to explain that when you get your camera, it's set to auto ISO. That means the camera is changing your old school way, your film speed. Remember 100, 200, 400, 800 speed film? This is what ISO is. It's the speed of your film, though there's no film in the camera. So here it's the sensitivity to light. The higher the ISO, the more sensitive your sensor is. The lower the ISO, the less sensitive. So if you're in a super bright environment, the ISO generally is lower, like a bright sunny day. You're in an environment like we're sitting in right now that it's darker, we're gonna have a slightly higher ISO. Now, keep in mind, higher ISOs mean you might see some more noise or grain in your image. That's just what happens as you raise the ISO. I don't shoot auto ISO, so I just come in here and I set it to whatever I'm going to shoot. Right now it's 100, but you can then arrow through or turn the dial, the back dial, right? Yep, this back dial, and that's gonna change it. You can go all the way up to 25,600. I do not recommend going all the way up that high because it might look like Swiss cheese. You don't always have to come into the menu system to change your ISO. You can quickly change that from your multifunction button or the Q menu, or it literally has a button that says ISO on the back of the camera, so you could quickly make that change. We've got ISO speed range. That means you can set it to say, well, I don't want it to go to 100 or I don't want it to go to 32,000. We can actually set it to say, well, I don't want 32,000. So I'll say I want it to max out right here at 12,800. And then we lock this in. You would just touch the OK button and go from there. Auto range, same thing. If you're going to shoot auto ISO, you could say, I don't want you going past 6,400 so that it won't automatically do that. Minimum shutter speed, I leave that on auto. I don't mess with that setting. Now we're gonna go back into the menu. HDR shooting and HDR PQ, something I don't shoot right now. I leave this off. You might see this more in the future, but honestly, I don't think you're ever gonna shoot in this I'll say right now. The only screens that can display this are your iPhone Pros, iPhone Pro Max. Some iPads have this. It's interesting, but I'm not sure that it's gonna really take off right now because most people can't play it back. They don't have displays that show it. HDR mode, I leave that off. Auto lighting optimizer off. Highlight tone priority, I leave all of this stuff off. Anti-flicker shooting is something we may want to use. So here you have two options. Flicker on, it says if enabled is set, the shutter release time lag becomes longer. Continuous shooting speeds may become slower. The reason that might be the case is because if you're shooting in an old gymnasium and you have those lights that flicker, or there's LED lights that flicker on a flickering board of some kind, what happens is your camera, when you just shoot it with it off, is gonna take pictures no matter when you press that shutter. Now, if it's flickering and you put on anti-flicker, it's gonna wait for the flicker, it's gonna flick or flack. It's gonna wait till the flick is not flicking and it's gonna take the picture. It's subtle, you won't really notice it. You may slow down just a little bit in terms of shooting speed, but it's making your picture more usable so you don't get any of those bad lines on them, any of the flicker lines. So that's anti-flicker. 3, flash control. Really is not much to talk about there. Metering mode, there's 4 different types of metering modes that I don't change anymore. This is more for old school style of shooting because our electronic viewfinder simulates exposure for you. So if it's overexposed, you see it in your eye. If it's underexposed, you see it in your eye. So the metering modes are really not that important anymore. You've got evaluative metering, partial metering, spot metering, and center weighted. Like I said, back in the day, it really mattered. Moving on to number 4, we've got white balance, auto white balance. So white balance I generally leave on auto unless I'm using flash. And when you shoot RAW, remember all that RAW data, you can change the white balance after the fact without hurting your image. Now, if you're shooting JPEG and you shoot white balance and you select something wrong, it's gonna be a little harder to make those changes after the fact in the JPEG. So most of the time, I'm locked into auto white balance. So if you wanna set your custom white balance, you could go ahead and do that. You might do that in a situation where you're shooting in the studio and you're shooting color, a color chart. You wanna lock in that balance so that you can match every single image, or you're using strobe or flash and you want to set it, or any other lights set to different color temperatures, you can lock that in with your camera. It's really simple. White balance shift bracketing, I don't touch that. Color space, I leave on sRGB. Picture style is important to talk about. It's set to auto right now. Now, picture style affects your JPEGs and your video recording. It does not affect your RAW file. So your RAW data is not going to be affected here. Now, when you take a picture, and if it's RAW or whatever, and you have your picture style, you'll see that preview on the back of the camera with the picture style, but when you bring it into the computer, you'll have that raw data. So you've got auto, standard, portrait, landscape, fine detail, neutral, faithful, monochrome, and you can actually set 3 different versions that you tweak for yourself. I generally leave it in auto or tweak standard just a little bit for my own personal taste, but I think auto is the best place to be, especially if you're shooting RAW. If you're shooting landscape, I mean, if you're shooting different things and you're shooting JPEGs, maybe you want to come in here and tweak this, but will you actually remember to do it? Will it be a pain in the ass? That's why I say shoot RAW. Now, remember I talked about monochrome. If you shoot in monochrome right now and you shoot JPEG, you're going to have black and white. That's what your image is going to give you. I like tweaking the black and white after the fact, so I have the option for color as well as monochrome. If you want it locked in, that's up to you, but I think that is not a really good choice to have. So just know that if you're set to monochrome, that's going to affect your video recording, as well as if you're shooting JPEGs, it's just going to be black and white. Cool. Clarity, another thing I don't really touch. This is going to affect your JPEG. I may just punch it up 1, but that's just for the back of the camera for my preview, but it's really not something you need to worry about. Shooting creative filters is currently off, but there's these different options that you could do. What's it say? Off, grainy black and white. If you ever shoot in grainy black and white, I will yell at you. Why are we gonna add grain to an image? Doesn't make any sense. Soft focus? Why would I want an out of focus picture? Don't do it. What's that say? Fisheye effect? Oh no, don't do any of this stuff. Please don't do any of this stuff. Just leave it off. Unless you're like 8 years old and you give this camera to a kid, let the kids experiment and play with that stuff because they want to be creative. But as an adult, I mean, I really shouldn't be ageist there. If you really want to play with those toy camera and do that, do it. But no professional uses that stuff in the real world. But if you want to play with it, go ahead and play with it. It's up to you. It's your camera, it's your choice. Let me cut in here and say that this video is brought to you by Squarespace. If you're looking to build your very own online portfolio, use what I use and have been using for over 10 years. 10 years! Because it's simple, easy, affordable, and I don't need to know coding. And if you don't know coding, this is super simple to just drag and drop and get your galleries up in a matter of minutes. To get your 14-day free trial, head on over to squarespace.com/FronosPhoto. If you decide that it's for you, use the code FronosPhoto at checkout to get 10% off your first order. Now, let's get back to the video. Moving on to number 5, lens aberration correction. I turn everything off that the camera is doing digitally. So I will turn this, well, it's a digital camera, so I don't actually turn it off when I'm using it because you know what I'm saying. I turn this off, get rid of it. Distortion control, correction, I turn off. Digital lens optimizer, I also disable all of this. I don't want the camera making corrections for the lenses. Now, some of the less expensive lenses, like the one I have here, the 18-150 kit lens, there may be imperfections in the lens that the camera is going to correct with these options. This is something that if you shoot RAW, you can change it after the fact. So I just like to turn it off because I don't want the camera making these decisions for me at this point. Chromatic aberration correction, turn that off. Diffraction correction, and I turn that off as well. So back to the menu. Let's see what we have. Long exposure noise reduction. Thankfully that's off. This used to be something they would set to on to like medium, but what this means is if you're shooting a long exposure, it's going to introduce more noise to your image because the longer you expose the image sensor, the more possibilities for noise to show up. This would, if you turn it on, help get rid of it, but there's always a trade-off. The trade-off is, and I'll explain this right here, high ISO speed noise reduction. I don't want it on low, I don't want it high, I don't want it on standard, I turn it off. Options are limited with RAW or RAW plus JPEG image quality. I just turn this off altogether. What happens is noise and grain are these dots, right? Film grain, they're dots. It's noise, each pixel, you see it possibly when you shoot at higher ISOs. I'm okay with that. I rather have something that's sharp and in focus than have noise reduction on that makes it look smooth and fake, like a watercolor painting. I don't like it, so I turn it off. Dust delete data, something I've never used in any camera, so we're not even gonna touch it. 6, multiple exposure mode is currently disabled. Multiple exposures is something we used to do with film, where we would take a picture, we wouldn't advance the film, and we would expose it twice or more, multiple exposures on the same thing. It's a fun thing to play with. It's a fun little creative exercise, so maybe try it out, but this is where you would turn it on. I leave it off. Raw burst mode, another thing I've never used. You have to use proprietary software for it. It's for taking pictures super duper quick and then plucking out JPEGs from it. Don't recommend doing it. Focus bracketing, another thing that I leave disabled as well. 6, now we're into some good stuff. Drive mode. Right here we've got our drive mode. This is for single shooting, meaning when we press the shutter button, it's only going to take one picture. Next, we've got high plus mode. Now this is high speed continuous shooting. So let me lock that in here. Let me get out of the menu system real fast because I want to show you this. Take off our lens cap, and don't worry about the exposure, it's not good, but this should start taking a lot of pictures quickly. Boom, a lot of pictures quickly. That's high speed continuous shooting. That's, you know, kind of a mode that I stay in all the time. We'll talk more about that when we move on later, but you have other options. You have high speed continuous, so it's a little slower. You've got low speed continuous, a little slower. You've got your self-timer, 10 seconds. Then you've got self-timer, 2 seconds. Then you've got self-timer with continuous shooting. So I believe, what do I turn this? Yeah, I think you could take 9, 10 pictures. So you could take 10 pictures. So you would do this, you would set this, it's a timer mode. So you would set it, focus, run, press the shutter button, and then it's gonna take 10 pictures in a row. Click, 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 click. I wasn't counting, maybe that was 10. So in this case, I'm just gonna stay in high speed continuous. If you're shooting an inanimate object, meaning it's not moving, and you don't need high speed continuous to try and get those between moments, and you wanna save frames, save space, just go to single shooting every time you press it, or go to low continuous, or just regular continuous. Interval timer is currently disabled. It's great that they put these in these cameras. You used to have to buy a separate device to control interval timer shooting. This is if you want to do time lapses. You go in here, you would go to enabled, and you can set it to say, I want it to take 10 shots, so basically one shot every 10 seconds. You can do that, or you can make it go longer. It's really cool for time-lapse photos that you want to stitch together later. Bulb timer is currently disabled. We've got silent shutter function. So your camera, as you heard me take those rapid-fire pictures continuously, you heard sound. That's because the shutter is flipping and it's coming up and down as I take pictures. If you are in a mode, in a situation where you need to be silent, you can go into silent mode. I'll show you. We go on, let me take a picture. Let me get back into the menu, out of the menu. You didn't hear it, right? And I actually just took like 2 or 3 pictures right there. That is in completely silent mode. So you won't hear it. That's really great if you can't make any noise. Press conference, recital where you can't make noise. There may be some trade-offs, like if you were to shoot baseball, someone swinging a bat, someone swinging a golf club, you might get a little bit of warping happening because of what's called the readout speed of your sensor. That might happen. But if your only option is to shoot silent, then you just shoot silent. And that's how you turn that on. So I'm gonna go ahead and turn that back off because I really don't need to shoot silent in most situations. Shutter mode, I leave this on electronic first curtain shutter. That's where the camera has it set. That's what I use, I leave it on there. Now, release shutter without card. What that means is if you don't have a card in the camera, you can take pictures. Makes no sense. Turn that off. You don't want to accidentally be taking pictures and not realize you don't have a card in the camera, and then you get back and you're like, oh snap, no card in the camera. Moving on to number 8, we've got image stabilization mode. This camera does not have built-in image stabilization that's mechanical, meaning there's nothing floating with the sensor. A lot of the more expensive cameras have what's called image stabilization of the sensor, so it's going to counterbalance any moving. Here, you might only get it if your lens has the stabilization. So they offer you a mode that is digital. Now, IS is currently on because this lens has image stabilization, so I want that to be on, but I don't want to have digital IS on. Now, as you can see here, it's got a video camera next to it. There are 2 different menus. There's a menu for video, there's a menu for stills. We're in the stills menu right now. We'll go through the video one a little later, but this is saying that you could turn on digital IS, which crops in a little bit but then uses digital IS to stabilize, digital image stabilization. It works pretty well, but it crops in on your image a little bit. So we go ahead and we leave that off. Customize quick controls, that's right here. That's this Q button that I already showed you on the back of the camera. You can customize the layout there. I'm not gonna change anything right now in there, but this is where you would go to edit that, reset it, or clear all of that in your custom setting. Next up, we have touch shutter is disabled. What that means is if you enable it and you touch the back of the screen, it's gonna take a picture as you touch the screen. Or if your nose touches the screen, it might also take a picture. I'm not a fan of touch shutter. I turn that off. And since we're here, I don't like using an LCD to shoot pictures. A lot of people who bought this camera, you guys out there, may have only used a cell phone to take pictures or something without a viewfinder. So you're used to holding the camera out in front of you. That is not the recommended way to do it because it's not very sturdy or stable to do this. You might get more shake. It also does look more amateurish, and sometimes looking amateurish is not a good look if you're trying to get hired for something. The proper way to hold a camera, and I almost said in my opinion, but it's really kind of almost fact. The proper way to hold the camera is like this. You hold your finger and your hand underneath. Your right hand goes on here. You press your shutter button right here. You go like this, tuck the elbows in, put your eye up to the viewfinder. It's really stable. You zoom like this. You don't zoom like this over the top. You know someone's new when they turn it over the top. Don't make fun of them. Maybe ask them if they've ever tried. Don't be like, you're holding the camera wrong. It's something I would have done when I was younger. But what I say is I try to frame it in a way, hey, have you ever tried to shoot like this? Try it. Oh, is that more comfortable? And they're like, you know what that really is? I'm like, yeah, it's just more stable. It's gonna allow you to zoom easier. So that's how you properly hold a camera. Moving on, image review. I like to keep this off, meaning every time you take a picture, it's gonna show up on the back of the camera for 2 seconds. I don't want that. I'm taking pictures. I don't need to. I see the picture right in front of my face when I take the picture. So it's more of a distraction. I turn this off. Get out of here. Next up, viewfinder display is currently disabled because I'm plugged into it. I can't use it when I'm using this recorder right here, so that's why it's disabled. Next up, high-speed display is currently grayed out because I'm plugged in again, so I put on the high quality frame rate. I like that. Metering timer, 8 seconds. That's for how long the meter is gonna stay on. I don't even mess with that anymore either. 9, display simulation. This is important to keep enabled. We want it for exposure, not exposure and depth of field, because depth of field, it's gonna show you what, if you're shooting wide open and really shallow and getting that blurred out background, you would see that in the viewfinder, but that's kind of a distraction for shooting, and it might also slow down your shooting. So I just leave it set to exposure. This is really good. I'm actually gonna show you this right now. You see how it's dark in here? That's because it's underexposed. But as I turn my shutter speed and I bring it lower, it's now more properly exposed. But I'm seeing that in the viewfinder. So you're seeing the exact exposure in front of you, so you now have an exact representation of something that's your exposure that's pretty close to spot on right there. So it's great that you can see that exposure right in front of you. Let me get back into the menu here. But yeah, the exposure is right in front of your eyeball. That's why it's great to have that setting on. OVF Simulator View Assist. I leave this off. I believe this makes it super duper bright to simulate what an optical viewfinder would look like. I don't know why you would use this. I personally don't. Shooting info display. We've got screen info settings. What you're seeing here is what you're gonna see in the view, actually on the back screen. So this is what you're gonna see on the back screen if you were gonna hold the camera without looking through the viewfinder. Say we don't want all this other information, we can turn this off and it will not show up anymore. Next up, we have viewfinder info toggle settings, which is similar to the one for the screen, except it's for your electronic viewfinder. You can go in here, select which ones you want to show up. So basically, if I was to hit the info button while looking through the electronic viewfinder, it would switch from each one of these. It will toggle through and rotate. If I don't want this one to show up, I can just be like, yep, don't want that one ever to show up, and then hit OK. You also have the info and edit, so you could make those changes if you wanted to. Viewfinder vertical display is currently on, so when you're shooting vertical, it will rotate the information that you see in the viewfinder. Greatest thing second greatest thing ever since the EVF. It's just cool that when you go vertical, all of your settings are now easily seen. You don't have to read them sideways or upside down. Grid display. Some people like shooting with a checkerboard to help them to get their line straight. I don't. I am really good at getting my line straight, and I don't like the distractions. But if you want the 3:3 in your viewfinder, that's what you could use. And we'll just go back out here. We've got histogram display brightness. So it's set to brightness or RGB. I've never used a color histogram, and I rarely use the brightness one, but that's it. And here, this would show you large or small histogram in the viewfinder. That's something for you to decide if you want to use. I could show you the histogram a little later. Lens info display, focal length display. Here, right bottom hand corner, you see ISO. Above that, you've got your Wi-Fi that's grayed out. You see that number changing? Yep, that's what it means to zoom, and it's showing you the info display for your millimeters. That's cool. I like to know what millimeter I'm shooting at because sometimes I want to be at 35 and I make sure I'm at 35. Next up, we've got reverse display, which I believe entails when you flip out the rotatable screen that it's reversing it. It's kind of confusing, so I just leave it on because I haven't noticed any difference. Viewfinder display format. So right now, that's full display is display 1, and crop down a little bit. It's just making it a little smaller. If you wear glasses, yeah, you're gonna have a little trouble with this electronic viewfinder with glasses on because it's so small, but this may help you shrink it down a little bit so that you can see it a little better. I leave it set to display 1. Display performance, power savings, no, I go to smooth because I like Rob Thomas. He is so smooth. So I usually just go to smooth because it's gonna give me a smoother look in the viewfinder, less herky-jerky. Now we're up to 10, movie record size. So we're not in the movie settings, menu settings, but you still have this option here as number 10. This is where you would go ahead and change the different way. You wanna get into 4K, you got your 4K right here. That's 4K 30, 4K 24, full HD at 60 frames a second, 30 frames, and then 24 frames a second. So this is where you're gonna select your video movie record size. So the reason that they put this here is you still have the record button on top of the screen. So even if you're not in the movie record mode, you can hit record with this red button up top, and it's still going to do that even if you're in the stills mode. So that's why it's here. Sound recording is currently set to auto. Unless you really know what you're doing here, you would, switch it to manual, and then you would control the VMU. You would control how you wanna do this. Record level, you would just change the volume. See that? It's changing. Hey, 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 hey. That's pretty good right about there. Yeah, you see we want it to be right around negative 12 decibels right there. Lock it in, hit OK, but for now, I'll go back to auto. A lot of you guys are gonna be shooting in auto right off the rip. ISO speed settings for video, auto slow shutter, all this stuff we don't really need to talk about right now because this is for movies, and that is the biggest menu system here for stills. If you were in auto, you would probably see like 3 menu systems. So if you're wondering, why don't I see all these menu systems? I probably should have said this about 20 minutes ago, but if you're not seeing everything, it's because of that. Let me jump in here and remind you how important it is to have glass, 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 glass. If you just have one lens right now, but you'd like to see what other options exist from Canon in their RF lineup, you can go to the link that is up on the screen right now and check out all of the different lenses that they have. And if you'd like to purchase something, you can do so right from the website. Next, we move into autofocus. We've got AF operation. Right now it's set to 1 shot. So every time I press the shutter button down, like I did earlier, you heard a beep and saw the green boxes. That is locking my focus in. I'm actually gonna show you. I might as well just show you here this working. Let me zoom in on myself. Boom. I hold my finger down halfway, it's not gonna continue to autofocus, right? Because it's locked in, that's 1 shot. But if I go back in here into the menu and I go to servo, that's continuous autofocus. It's gonna continuously autofocus wherever I go. It's not gonna zoom for you, but the focus is shifting. And as long as I press my finger halfway down, it's going to continuously autofocus that entire time. So I'm a big fan of leaving it in servo because I'm usually shooting subjects that are moving. So that's why you would want to do that. If you're shooting subjects that aren't moving and you want to lock in and exactly fine tune it, then you could go into 1 shot. But most of the times you're going to be in servo. AF area. So this mode that it's in is whole area AF. That means means it's going to use the entire sensor. The camera is going to do all of the work for you for focusing. It's going to try and pick the subject exactly where they should be. It's going to do all the work to track them. You've got custom ones. You've got flexible zone 1, 2, and 3, which I don't use. I sometimes use expanded area AF around, which gives you a box that you can move, or expanded area AF like this. Watch, I'm going to go here. You see that? That's my expanded box. I can move it around if I want and press the center button, the joystick. Press the center joystick button, it's going to bring it back to the middle. I would use this in a lot of situations where, you know, if I need to change the focusing box, I can, but most of the time, you just point the camera, and nowadays the autofocus is so good that it's going to find exactly what it needs to find. A lot of you guys are going to find yourself starting in whole area AF, but I sometimes, if it gets tricked or it's on the wrong subject, and I want to tell the camera where to go, I'll just point the box right where it needs to go, and then it finds the focus. Subject tracking is currently on. We want subject tracking. We want to track that subject, especially if you're shooting sports or dogs or animals. Dog is an animal, Jared. It's going to track anything that's moving. Subject tracking or subject detect, right now it's set to people, but you can set it to animals, vehicles, or none. I'm a big fan of subject detect for people because that's where you get your IAF. That's important. And even if you did animals, you can still do IAF with animals. Eye detection is enabled. It should always be enabled for finding eyes unless someone doesn't have eyes, and then it's going to be a problem. Switch tracking subjects. This is just the speed at which it's going to track, switch from one subject to the other. If it's on initial priority, it's going to stay locked on a subject longer that's in focus versus switching to another subject that runs across the screen. Either way, you could leave it in one right down the middle. It's going to probably give you the best results right there. Moving on to number 2, these are the different cases for your autofocus. Currently, it's in auto. Auto does a great job for this. I sometimes leave it in auto, but let me read you what case 1 is. It's versatile, multi-purpose setting. You can see that it's for people that run and people that skate. Subject's kind of similar to that. Tennis. So you would use this to continue to track subjects, ignoring possible obstacles like the tennis net. The net in front might be an obstacle, so if you're not focused on that and you're focused on the subject, it's not going to find other things. It's going to ignore most of the other things. It's not always perfect, but it's pretty good. Initially focus on subject, suddenly entering AF. Well, this one, case 4 is pretty good for sports. But yeah, if you want to go in there and select them, there's subtle differences to them. But right now I'll just leave it in 4. Moving on to number 3 here under the AF menu, which is magenta. We've got one-shot AF release priority. I leave this on focus. It's fine. Preview AF is currently disabled. I don't want my autofocus continuously going if I don't press the shutter button, so I leave that off. Lens drive when AF is impossible, on as well. AF assist beam, always turn this off. This is what I disable. I'm not a big fan of it. I don't want it distracting people. I already talked about that earlier. 4, touch and drag AF settings. You can actually set this to say active touch area of the bottom right-hand side, or the left, or the top, or the bottom, or Jesus, they give you a lot of options here, or the whole panel. So what this means is, oh, I actually can't do it right now because I lost all touch controls, but what it means is I would drag on this bottom, this right side of the LCD screen, and that's going to move that focusing point on the screen. So that's another option that you can do. You really don't need it in this day and age. That was really more important before we had lock-on tracking that was so good. So I leave this off right now. I leave it off. Yep, off. Boom. Back in the menus. Limit area AF. So just like we could limit viewfinder options, if we don't want to use these expandable, flexible ones ever, and we don't want them to be a distraction, meaning we don't want to have to be like, oh, I need to click all the way over here to do this. Remember, you have a touch screen. You can just touch the focusing mode that you want. So this isn't really that big of a deal, but I turn those off, I hit OK, and they're no longer going to be an option when I look for it. Sensitivity AF point select. This is how fast the focusing point changes. I like it to move faster, so I'm gonna move it up to faster. Orientation linked AF. So I leave the same for both. This means that your focusing point, if it's on the left side of the screen, is gonna stay there. When you go vertical, it's gonna stay on the bottom part, exactly where it was. I like that. I can move it myself if I need to, so that's why I use that mode. 5, manual focus peaking settings are off. If you're someone who wants to see manual, I mean, honestly, most people buying this camera don't even know what this is. I don't shoot manual. If you do shoot manual, it's actually pretty helpful to turn this on to help you see in the viewfinder what's in focus. I wouldn't try this for moving subjects, but if you want to fine tune it, go ahead and turn that on. Focus guide, we want this on, right, Steven? Yeah, I like focus guide. So when you're in manual focus, there's actually, okay, I will show you. I will show you, Jared, and I'm gonna switch this switch over to manual. Now I have to take this off. We're gonna zoom in here. Yeah, did you see how it was green? That meant it was in focus. But as I'm turning the focus right here, green's gonna mean good. That means that's in focus. But if I move, see, it's out. But that guide is really helpful. But you know what else is really helpful, Steven?
What?
Autofocus. Because it just does a really good job. I mean, it's like if you're gonna be worried about fine tuning like that, the only time you're gonna use that is say you're shooting a subject who is wearing a mask, a football player, hockey player, and you're having trouble because it's not focusing on that eye, and you wanna switch into it, that's where you would switch into manual and use the guide at that point. Movie servo AF is enabled. That means when you're shooting video, it's gonna have autofocus. Electronic full-time manual focus, leave that off. Lens electronic manual focus, off as well. Focus ring is set to focus. So that's this ring right here. That is your focus ring. That's set to focus. The funny thing is you could actually change it to do other things. Focus ring rotation, left, right, plus, minus, leave that exactly where it is. RF lens MS focus ring sensitivity. So this is how sensitive the focus is going to be. Like as you turn the ring, do you want it to be slower as you focus? Because if it's really fine tuning something, if you're shooting macro, you may want it to be not focus as fast as you turn the ring. So if you do it really slow, you want it to be really small increments of focus. So that's where you would go for that. And yes, we are done with the AF menu. Next up, we've got the playback menu. There's not a lot of stuff that I change in the playback menu because I don't protect images, erase images, rotate stills. I don't change movie rotation info, no ratings, print orders, or photo book setup. Photo book setup? I'll do that on the computer. So skip this one. Raw image processing. I'm not gonna edit raw files in the camera. Basically, if you shot raw and you wanted to make a JPEG because you didn't have a JPEG, you could tell it to convert that specific file to JPEG, and it would do it. Creative assist, nope. Quick controls, playback, creative filters, nope. Red eye reduction correction, nope. And no resizing. I don't touch any of this. Cropping, no. HEIF to JPEG, I don't shoot HEIF. I don't shoot JPEG either, so no. Slideshows, I guess if you're gonna plug into a TV to show a slideshow, you would come here. None of this stuff. Okay. We've got magnification, I do. I changed this to actual size. I like that. And from focusing point. So magnification. So if I want to, I guess I have to show you, right? Yeah, I'll show you how that works later. Image jump with turning this top dial. That means that when we're in the images, and I'll show you when we get to the showing you the images, every time you turn this dial right here, it's gonna skip 10 images. So it's gonna quickly jump through them. So I actually like that. You can actually change it to a bunch of different options, but wow, there's a lot of options I don't touch. So I do the 10. Now we've got number 5, playback info display. This is important. See all of the different info that's showing up. This is when you're playing back the image, you can switch through and see all these. I don't use that one, that one, that one, that one. This is information I don't need. I don't care about this, I don't care about that. I do care about my settings, and I do care about this. So those are the ones that I kind of use and toggle through. That's what I use there. Highlight alert is currently disabled. That's the blinkies on the back of the screen if something's blown out. Really not important to turn on. AF point display, I love seeing the red display. It shows you where your focus was. That red box where your focusing point was, that now will be showing, that will be shown to you when you're playing back your image. Playback grid, so if you had that 3x3 grid on, it's currently off in playback, but you could turn it on. I don't know why you would turn it on. Movie play count. Yes, we leave that to record time, and HDMI HDR output is currently off. And that takes us through the play menu. It gets shorter and shorter as we go through because we've already gone through the hardest ones. Next, we've got the Wi-Fi and Bluetooth connection one. This is the purple mode. If you're going to connect your camera to the Canon Connect app, which I highly recommend you try, it would be perfect for using in the situation that I'm in right now. I could connect to our Canon EOS R5 over there, use my phone to do that, and actually control the focus, control my settings, hit record, take photos. It's a really good thing. Or if you want to transfer images to a phone wirelessly, this is where you would go ahead and do this. I'm not going to show you how to set that up right now. Canon has good walkthroughs that show you exactly how to do this, but this is the area where you would turn this on and off. Next up, we've got the wrench menu. The wrench is actually pretty good. Select folder, I don't change that. File numbering, I do leave on continuous. That means if I take 100 pictures, I take the card out of the camera, I put the card back in, I turn it back on, it thinks I would start back at 0 if I wasn't in continuous. So it's gonna start at 101 for the next picture, then 102. Then what, Steven? That's right. Thank you for paying. It was really just to make sure Steven was paying attention and earning his keep back there. So that's continuous. Next, we have format. So when you get a new card, you put it in the camera, you hit format, and it's ready to go to receive the images that you're taking. But format is also important to pay attention to because if you haven't saved the images on the memory card yet, you do not want to format them or you will lose those images. So the rule of thumb is after your shoot, put the files on your computer, then make sure they're backed up and saved in multiple places. And before you go ahead and reformat it, make sure all of that is done. So you have that option. So there you go. We've got auto rotate is currently on for, it shows a camera and a computer. That means it's going to auto rotate the image in the computer and on the camera, which I actually don't like. I like that it rotates it on the computer because I want my vertical shots to show up vertical, but not horizontal on the computer, or horizontal as I like to say. But I like on my camera for them to show up vertical to take up the whole display so that when I do turn the camera vertically, I have the whole image instead of just cropped down to the middle portion, making it much smaller. So I just turn it to on the computer. Add rotation information for video is important these days. We're going to enable that. So if you shoot video vertically for TikTok or dancing, or which is TikTok, I mean, you're woo-woo dancing, my money don't jiggle, jiggle, it folds. All of that, you would want to put this on so that it tells that file that when it goes in the computer, that this is a vertical file, that you don't have to change it later. So that's good that they've added that. Date, time zone, obviously you set your date and time zone right there. Language, you select the language you want, and you get your menu in that particular language. Number 2, video system. I leave this NTSC. If you're overseas, it's already gonna be set to something else. Help text size is currently set to small. That's for if there's actually help in the camera, it's gonna set the text size for that. Mode guide is enabled. That's to show you the different mode options as you turn the dial. I'm actually gonna disable this. I don't need to see the guide show up every time on the back of the screen because I don't need that. Beep is currently enabled. So when you're in one shot, as I was earlier, you heard the beep when it got in focus. So you hear the audible beep and it says, yep, you're in focus. But if your subject moves in one shot or you move, they're gonna move out of focus. You gotta refocus again. Volume is your playback volumes for everything from shutter volume if you're shooting electronic shutter and not completely silent, focus beep, touch sounds, self timer, and beep for video as well. So this is where you would go to change all of those settings. Power savings, we have everything disabled right now in power because we don't want to save power because we don't want it to disconnect from here. But that's where you can go in here and make changes. Like I want the screen to go off in 1 minute if I leave it sitting, or I want the auto power, I want the camera to power off after 10 minutes. It's probably pretty good, you know, 5-ish minutes, 10 minutes if you're not using the camera for it to power off to save some juice. Let me jump in here once again and say, are you tired of all your friends and family looking at your photos and saying they're fire emoji or thumbs up emoji, but don't really give you actual feedback that can help you grow as a photographer? Well, I've done something about it. I started phronosphoto.com/mentorships. When you go over to that website, you're going to see 2 different options that I offer. One is a recorded 15-minute rapid fire critique where I take up to 50 of your images that you send in and give you a rapid rapid fire critique. The other option is a one-on-one 45-minute live Zoom call with me where we go over your images and answer any questions that you might have. There's a full sample of the 15-minute rapid fire critique as well as the one-on-one mentorship on this webpage, so you can see it to see exactly what we're going to talk about. So if you want me to be your mentor and give you actual good feedback on your photos, not always good because sometimes they won't be good photos, but it's going to be a real critique to help you become better. Now, let's get back to the video. Number 3, screen viewfinder display. I leave this set to auto 1 because that's going to do the changing from your screen to your viewfinder. I leave that on. Screen brightness. I leave this set to the middle because I think that's going to be the best representation. If you're outside and it's bright and sunny, you could make it fully bright, but the better thing to do is put your eye up to the viewfinder because now it's shaded, it's a box, it's a screen. It's much easier to look at than your viewfinder. Viewfinder display brightness. I leave this on auto now. That's your display. When you're looking through, it's going to be auto. So if you're in a bright area, it's going to make the viewfinder slightly brighter than when you're in a dark area, but it's still going to give you a pretty good representation of your exposure that's very close. So I leave this on auto. I don't fine-tune my viewfinder color. UI magnification is disabled. That's more for if you have trouble seeing, you would go into here, you would double tap on the screen with 2 fingers, and it will enlarge everything so that it's easier to read. It's also easier to read if you put your eye up to the viewfinder as well. So HDMI resolution is also set to auto. Touch control is set to standard. If you're a sensitive person like me, you can put it on sensitive, but standard touch is fine because sensitive means like my nose is gonna touch the screen. I don't want it to make changes for me. Multi-function lock. This just shows you what it's going to lock if you use this button. I don't lock anything, so I don't even go in here and change anything. Switch, that's the switch in the front of the camera. Auto to, we want it set, so if we switch it from auto AF to MF, that's going to allow you to do it. If you disable it, it's obviously not going to work. It doesn't make any sense to do that. Sensor cleaning, you could do this at power off, which I like to turn this off. Let me go in here. I'm going to disable it. That's every time you turn the camera off, it's going to clean the sensor. It shakes, it goes, and it tries to shake off the little dust from it. It's actually should be called the Taylor Swift mode because it's shake it off, shake it off. She stays up too late. She's got nothing on her plate. That's what people say. I disable this personally. Now choose USB connection app. I don't connect this to the computer, so I don't worry about this at all, so I just skip past it. 5, we're not resetting the camera because we just set up our camera. Custom shooting mode, C1 and 2. That's for those 2 on the top of the camera. You can lock those in. This is where you would go to do that. You've got your battery info, which it's not going to tell us how much exactly in a percentage, but it says remaining, it's full. It's the 3 green dots mean that it's a newer battery. As the battery gets older and charged more and dissipates the charge or gets rid of it, you're going to see that your lifespan of the battery is going to wear out. I mean, that's not for like 5, 6, 7 years. That's going to happen. Copyright information, you could put your name in here, so it's going to save it in the metadata of your JPEGs and your RAWs, and your copyright, like copyright Frono's photo or Jared Polin Frono's photo. So you could enter all of that information here with the touch screen. Manuals and software, so if you want to get a digital version of the manual, just hold up your phone to this, get the QR code, and it's going to launch that website where you can find that. Certification logo is just something for the United States, and the firmware option, it's currently set to its version 1.0.1. If you're going to need to change firmware to update, because they do this, they update the software like you update on your computer, you can update the software on the camera. So when they come out with a new one, you would go to Canon's website, put the file on the card, they'll walk you through exactly how to do it. Put the card in the camera, come to firmware, it's going to know that you have new firmware in here, you hit go ahead, update. It's going to update it to the latest and greatest. Next up is the orange menu. This is more of the custom setting menu. This is where you would make subtle changes, like exposure level increments. I leave thirds of a stop. That's where you should leave it. ISO speed setting increments, thirds of a stop. Meaning if I change it to 1 stop, it would go from 100 to 200 to 400 to 800, but we want in-betweens. We want 500 ISO or 640. We want more control, so thirds of a stops are great right there. Speed for metering / ISO auto. I just read up on this. It's really not something I play with. I leave it on auto. It's super confusing. Bracketing, auto cancel. Another thing we're not going to touch, but it's on. It's not going to affect anything to just leave it on. Bracketing sequence. nothing. Number of bracketed shots are 3. This is for if you want to do a multiple exposure, not multiple exposure, you want to take multiple exposures in a room, say for an HDR type photo later, you're gonna bracket. You're gonna shoot one stop less, one at the proper exposure, and one stop over, and then you're gonna have them merged together after the fact. It's gonna use all 3 of those to create a new file. That's what HDR does. That's where you would get into bracketing. Safety shift, I still don't know, so let's read what safety shift says. Shutter speed aperture to prevent under or overexposure in shutter, nope, this is off. And I leave this off at all times. Second menu, same exposure for new aperture. Yep, leave that off. Set shutter speed range, we're not changing that. We're not setting aperture range either, we're leaving that alone. I leave the direction all the same. I don't know why you would change the direction unless you're one direction and you only want to go one way. I leave this positive exposure to the right, negative, down. It's just self-explanatory. I leave that alone, leave that alone. I leave this alone. Custom buttons, I don't leave alone. This is where we can get into custom controls. So if I want to, let's say, yep, change this one, the star one, which is the AE lock, which I don't ever use. Let's say I want to quickly go to one shot, from servo to one shot, boom. I'm gonna go ahead and lock that in. So now, when I go into shooting mode, watch this. I'm gonna hit the star button, watch the bottom of the screen, one shot AF is now on. Servo AF is now on, just pressing this button. I love having that option there because there are times where I'm shooting and let's say the subject just isn't moving, or you're shooting something that's moving fast and you want it to be continuous, you do that. And then you track them, but then maybe you want the goalpost next and you're having trouble getting it, so you just go back to one shot and you lock in on that one thing. That's a great feature to have. So this is where you go to make all of those custom changes. Self-explanatory, you just make those changes. Like if we don't want to use the flash button here, we could go in and select it to do something else. Right? Any of these options, so many options, or you could deactivate it and just say don't do anything if you accidentally hit it, so we turn it off. Back here, custom dials. So this is where if you had a control ring, you can go ahead and set the control ring. So right now we could make the focus ring a control ring, or if you have an RF lens that has a control ring, you would go in here and you could change, like, oh, I want ISO to change, or I want to change my white balance. I mean, I honestly don't like control rings, so I personally leave it off. Clear custom settings? No, Jared, we're not going to do that. We just set everything. Add cropping information? Nope, off. Default erase options, this is just telling you that when you hit the trash can button, what's gonna happen after you hit it. So you have different options. Erase selected, cancel, erase selected, ooh, that's terrible. Don't do this, leave this alone, leave it alone. Release shutter without lens is off. We don't want to be able to take pictures when the lens isn't on. It just makes no sense too. Plus you don't want to have your camera on when you're changing your lenses or don't have a lens attached. Retract lens on power off. This is if you have an auto powering lens, an auto zooming lens, which there aren't a lot right now, but it would retract when it's off. And clear all custom functions. We're not doing that because we just set the custom functions. And the last one finally under picture is your custom menu. This is my menu. So we would want to configure, we could add something to it. Select item to register. Sometimes I would put, actually a really good one to put in here is the silent shooting and flicker. That's a good one to do. So I would put silent function, I would put that in, register, yep, okay, good. It's now set in my menu. So we'll go back here, go back again. It's set in my menu right here with silent shutter. You actually have 2 of these. It's a shortcut for your favorite settings. I just came up with that myself, that you could just put things in that you want to. Back in the day, this made more sense because we didn't have all of these custom buttons on the back of the camera, like the multifunction button or the Q menu that give you everything that you need. The things that I used to put in here, I don't need to put in here anymore. So that's it. We just got through the menus for stills. Now let's move on quickly to the menus for video. All right, so now let's jump into the video menu. So I've switched the top of the camera to the video mode, and that means we're now in video shooting, which means we have a different menu system here. So under the red menu number 1, shooting mode. We're gonna click on this, and look, there's different options. You could shoot manual, you could shoot HDR video, which we're not gonna do. I would personally set it to manual if I'm gonna take more control. If you're not someone who's taking control of your camera, just leave it in the regular auto mode, and it's gonna do all of the settings for you. So do that. Movie record setting size, wow, you've got a lot of different options. They're self-explanatory. They also show you how much time you'll get on your card. Just go through and select the ones that you want. Just know that standard is a smaller file size than IPB. IPB has more data on it. The other things to keep in mind is that 2997 is really basically 30 frames a second. There's 60 frames a second, and we like to shoot more cinematic, and 24 frames a second is really what movies are shot in. It's a more cinematic look at things. Video games are in 60 frames a second. It's more smoothed out. It's more camcorder-like, and it's more like TV. So those are just quickly running through those different options. Next up, we've got high frame rate. It's currently off. We would go in here to enable HD 120 frames per second. Now it tells us that audio is not recorded in high frame rate movies. This is for slow motion. If you're slow motion for ya, I don't even know what song that is. But it's like, say you're shooting a tennis player and you want to get them hitting the ball in slow motion, right? You would film them in slow motion. You could speed it up later if you really wanted, but you will not get auto. So right now it's disabled. It's only going to enable when you want to actually shoot with that mode. Next, we've got digital zoom. I never digital zoom anything ever, so I turn that off. Sound recording, I showed you earlier, is currently set to auto. Second menu, exposure comp, same thing, we don't touch. We've already talked about ISO speed settings. You could set this to auto for video. I actually like auto for video. If I'm running in from an indoor situation to an outdoor situation, the ISO will change smoothly for you. That's okay to set in this case. You could also set the parameter to allow it to not go over, say, 6400 ISO if you don't want it to go much higher. HDR shooting, I'm not shooting that, so I leave it off. Auto lighting optimizer, same thing. I don't play with any of these. Let's see, it's on standard, high, low, and disable. So I go ahead and I disable that as well. High tone priority off, 1/8 stop increments. It's currently disabled because I'm plugged in. Is that correct, Steven? Yes. Yeah, so I actually like 1/8 increments sometimes. That's for your aperture. So if you say you're using like a 2.8 lens, it's going to allow you to have even more aperture options like f3. You know, you could go in there and make these subtle changes. So that is good if you know what you're doing. If you don't know what you're doing, probably leave it off. Auto slow shutter, I just leave this set to exactly where it is right out of the camera. Moving on to number 3, white balance. Remember, white balance is going to be locked in with your video. Auto white balance is pretty good, but if you're in, say, tungsten light or the light that just doesn't look right when it's an auto, you might want to lock that in. But understand that your white balance, say it's set to flash for whatever reason, and everything's super warm. If you end up going outside there, everything's going to be way over warm and it's going to be burnt in. So make sure, I mean, I like auto white balance for the most part. For people that are just starting out, it's going to do a pretty good job. If you need to lock in a custom one, this is where you would do it. White balance correction, leave this to 0:0. Picture style, this is where if you went to monochrome, you would only shoot in black and white and never get that color data back. Also, make sure that if you're in the wrong picture style, or if you tweak your picture style and it over sharpens things, you can't really soften it up that much after the fact. It's baked in. It's like a JPEG. It's not raw, it's baked in. Clarity, leave that where it is. Shooting creative filters is currently blacked out because we're not set to that either. 4, lens aberration correction. Again, I disable all of this. I still disable all of this. I don't want it, I turn it off. High ISO speed noise reduction. Again, something I disable. I don't want noise reduction to smooth anything out. So I turn that off as well. Let's go to number 5. We've got time-lapse movie is currently disabled because I'm plugged in. We've got movie self-timer is off. That's the same thing. Like if you're shooting stills and you want to do a timer, beep, 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 click, you would do it, you would set it, press it, and then it will set. It's really not something you're going to use for movies. You might as well connect to your camera via the app if you want to control it. And remote control is currently enabled. Image stabilization mode. So IS is on for the lens, and it's off right now for digital stabilization. Remember, digital is going to crop in a little bit and give you some stability. Like if you're running and chasing someone, it might be good to turn on. If you're going upstairs or walking really, well, it's not going to do much on the stairs. Actually, it is. If you're walking, running, anything that's bouncing around, this is going to digitally crop in and compensate for any of that shake. Just know that it's cropping in, so your wider angles will be less wider angle. Real quick, could you hit the thumbs up button as well as the subscribe button? Because I release a ton of videos every week, and if you hit that subscribe button and the bell, you will be notified when new videos come out. Now, let's get back to the user guide. Custom quick controls, same as with photos. You can customize what's gonna come up when you hit the Q menu. Shutter button function for movies. You could change this to say, you know what, when I press the shutter button, it's going to, right now it's set to no function, but it could start and stop movies. I kind of like it for starting and stopping movies, but you already have a record button right here, so we might as well just leave that off. Just know that you can change that if you want. Nothing with metering timing. Zebras are currently off. You could turn zebra lines on. That's going to help you with focusing if you're going to take more control of your camera. Shooting info display, same as before. You can change it for video. What do we want on? What do we want off? Viewfinder display, same thing. What do we want on? What do we want off? I still shoot video either I like looking through the electronic viewfinder to shoot video if I'm running and gunning. If you're on a tripod, you could just flip out the screen and use that as your viewfinder if you would like. So I still like using it for outside to shoot it. It's more stable and I can see it better than looking at the LCD screen. Grid display, same as before. I leave this off. Histogram is currently set to bright. Lens info display, I like that enabled. Focal length, because I like to show it, same as before. Back here. Reverse display, we leave on. We left it on before. We'll leave it on again. Viewfinder display format, same as before. Bigger, smaller, especially if you're wearing glasses. Standby low resolution on. Leave that. HDMI display, I leave that set. And time code, I don't mess with that at all. Moving on to AF. Movie servo is enabled. Remember, that's your autofocus. You want that enabled. AF area, same as with your stills. Which AF area mode do you want to use? Generally speaking, the all-encompassing one is pretty good, or one of these other 1-point AF or expanded AF area is going to be a good option to use. If you wanted to tell the camera where it should be focusing, especially if you have multiple people in the frame, that's actually where touching the screen can come in handy, where you're like, oh, I want to focus on the person behind this person. So you would hit boop, or boop, or boop, or boop, wherever you want it to focus. The camera does a really good job doing a cinematic pull just like that. Subject tracking on. We want to track subjects. Subject detect for people, animals, cars. Obviously self-explanatory at this point. Eye detection is enabled. I want to be able to see people's eyes. Let me just show Steven back here just to show you. There's Steven. There's the eye. It found him right there. Right there, it found his eye. So continuous focusing for him. Put my lens cap back on, get back here into the menu system, and switch tracking subject, same as before. Do we want it to switch quickly or stay on the initial one? You would make the changes there. Movie servo AF speed, always on, yep, and we have it set to almost fast. We could click on here and go even faster. Or if you want it to be more cinematic, you could have it go slower, but that means your focusing speed's gonna go slightly slower, more cinematic. It all depends on what you're shooting. Movie servo AF tracking sensitivity. We already talked about this. How responsive do you want it to be when tracking a subject? Do you want it to stay on a subject, lock on, or do you want it to be responsive and jump around to multiple different subjects? All right, number 3. Lens drive when AF is impossible, same as stills, we leave that on. Touch and drag AF settings is off. Don't really need that unless you have a joystick. Really use the joystick for that. Limit AF areas, same as before. We'd be like, oh, we don't want this, this, or this. I know I'm blowing through a lot of this stuff because we've already done it. You don't need to hear it again. Sensitivity, AF point selection. That's how fast your focusing points move across the screen for video. Let's see, manual focus peaking settings are off. That's if you were shooting manual focus, you would want to turn that on. And focus guide is currently off because we're not shooting manual. This is just the stuff for shooting manual. Electronic full-time manual focus is off. Lens electronic manual focus off, unless we switch over to manual focus. Focusing ring controls focus. All of this is exactly the same as we had before. So yeah, this is much quicker to get through. Playback settings, same as before. Wi-Fi settings, exactly the same. Wrench menus should be the same, right? Yeah, it's basically the same, just now you have, we already enabled this rotation, so this is all the same. Custom settings, all the same. And my menu is all the same as well. So yeah, we went through that one a little quicker, but that's the most important stuff for when you are setting your camera for video. So now that we've gone through all the menu systems, I want to show you what you're going to see on your LCD screen, or basically inside of your electronic viewfinder, and explain what the different icons are and the settings that you see. Now, you're seeing the screen right now. In the top left-hand corner, you see manual. M means manual. So if you were to change that to be TV, AV, auto, that's where it would tell you what it is. Now, to the right of that, you can see 2,970 images left in terms of the memory card, how many more images I can get on there. And then the 14 right next to it is considered your buffer. So sometimes you're gonna see it be 14, sometimes you'll see it be 15. Actually, when you change the ISO, you might notice that, let's go down to like 100. We should get extra in the buffer at that point. Yep, you get extra in the buffer. With Canons, as you go up in ISO, it takes up more space. And when you go down in ISO, it takes up less space. So it actually, you can see now I have 3,308 photos left. You're gonna see that, just know that it's gonna change depending on when you're shooting RAW, what your ISO is. It's actually pretty interesting that it does that. Now, to the right of 18, you can see it says 2 hours. That's the total amount of video that you can record in one sitting. You don't have a time limit. I mean, you do at 2 hours, but before that, you're probably gonna run out of storage space on your SD card or battery. So yeah, it's just showing you 2 hours at that point. And then right to the right of that, you've got your battery indicator showing you basically a full battery. Now, we're gonna get to what's on the left and the right in a second when we go into the Q menu, because everything that's in the Q menu is basically on the screen on the left and the right. But I wanna go down to the very bottom, more to the left of the bottom, where you see it says 1/20th of a second and has an orange semicircle. That orange semicircle is showing you that if you turn this dial right here, it's saying that's the front dial. You're seeing that I am changing my shutter speed. The back dial next to it that says 3.5, 3.5 is your aperture. So as I turn the back dial, it is going to change. To the right of that, that is your light meter. So if I take this off right now, my lens cap, wow, we're totally off. I need to turn my aperture down, slow my shutter speed down, and you can see how the meter is getting more in the center. So when it's in the center, that's saying that that is a properly exposed image, that based on the meter. So that's what your meter is, your light meter. But you could also look at your image and be like, you know what, that's close too, right? So you have the simulation right in front of you. So let me put this lens cap back on and show you that to the right of your light meter, you've got ISO, which is currently set to 100. You see above there that you have your Wi-Fi is currently off, and 18 millimeters is the lens, and as I zoom, that changes. And then to the right of that, it says exposure simulation. That means exactly what I just showed you in the viewfinder, that as you change your shutter speed, aperture, and ISO, your viewfinder is going to be simulating what the proper exposure is. Yeah, so let me hit the Q button and jump into there right now. And it jumps us to the back of the camera. This is what you're gonna see when you're looking through the electronic viewfinder or on the back of the screen. So we have AF up top. This is so you can select the different AF area modes quickly. While you're looking through the camera, you can make these changes. Do you see how I can't select 1, 2, and 3? Because we turned that off earlier. Right now, it's set to servo. You're really not gonna have to change this in the menu system because we have this the star button set to that, or at least I do. So that's just one thing you don't have to worry about changing at that point, is because we just hit this star and it goes from one shot AF to servo AF. So now we're gonna go back into Q. You can see that it's on servo. Go down a little bit. That is going to show that we are shooting RAW plus JPEG. Generally speaking, you don't need to change the size of your files once you start. That's why I just leave it on RAW. We've got movie record options you can change. You've got metering mode. You're not touching that. Still image aspect ratio. We're not changing that either for most things. This is to go back to shooting. Then we've got anti-flicker up here on the right-hand side. That's great. You've got your white balance option, your picture styles, your creative filters, and the subject detection. So the things that you want to get to quickly. So you can change the Q menu. You can put other features in here that you want to get to quicker. But the truth is, it works really well, the Q menu, for basically finding everything that you need quickly. Now, there is another button here we talked about, the multifunction button. If you're looking through the camera and you press it, you have a quick way to change your ISO. If you turn the top dial, you can see that's changing your ISO, and the back dial is going to rotate through the other quick settings, which are very similar to what you have in your Q menu. So you've got frames per second, you've got your servo, and you have your white balance. So these are things that you can quickly get to by hitting the MFN button. Then to get out of there, we just tap that shutter halfway, and it's gonna go ahead and bring us back to the view that you see through your viewfinder or on the LCD screen. All right, so now I wanna show you something with IAF that's interesting. So when you are in the full mode right here, which is all the way over to the right for your AF area, watch what happens when I focus here on Steven. So we've got Steven right here. Yep, you see that arrow? Look straight on, Steven, please. You see that arrow show up? If I move the joystick left or right, that's letting me know that I can select which eye to choose from. And then I can be like, oh, let me take a picture. Boom, boom. Oh, and it's super slow because the shutter speed is super slow. You see at the bottom, it says 1/6 of a second. That is really slow for what we're doing. And I can't really open my aperture up anymore, so I would just hit ISO and dial it back up. That's gonna allow me to speed my shutter speed back up. Yes, that's basic photography right there, but that's one of the things that I wanted to show you. So let's take a bunch of pictures here. Boom. You see the buffer? Wow, it filled actually pretty quick. It actually got through the buffer. We're shooting RAW and JPEG, so that's why we're seeing less pictures able to get. But I just keep shooting. That's really actually pretty good. So that's quicker than I expected it to be. So that's that. I just wanted to show you the IAF thing because that's great. Another thing, I'm gonna switch over to this focusing mode. So you see I can move the focusing box. I can press in the middle. It's gonna, let me show Steven. I can press in the middle of the joystick and that's gonna recenter this box. It's actually finding my eye from a distance. From a distance, the world seems gray and blue. But yeah, IAF, greatest thing ever. So now, put this back on and we're gonna move on to the next thing. So now let's turn the top dial from manual over to video so I can show you what the screen looks like. It's very similar, you have less options up there, but top left-hand corner, you can see now it says video, right? It has a video camera, it doesn't actually say video. 2 hours record time, so when I hit record, watch what happens. You see that it says record in the upper right-hand side, and it's counting up, showing you how long your recording is going. Now, more in the middle bottom to the left side of the screen, you can see the left and right audio meter. So you can see that right there. I'm gonna hit stop recording because I don't really need to record this, but you can see that meter is moving because it is tracking my audio. So back up to the top left, that's where it shows that we are shooting with we're shooting video. I'm gonna hit the Q menu because there's not much else to say here because all of this stuff shows up here. So you have your shooting mode for video, which is on auto. We could switch that over to manual to get more control, or HDR movie. So you have those different options. You can see when we go to HDR movie, there's less options that you can actually select. Scrolling down, same thing with autofocus, just like for video. You can, or just like stills, you can switch around those. One down even further. If you wanted to change your movie record size, you could do it there. Digital zoom we have off. We're always gonna leave that off. This is your IS, the hand shaking that's like, hi, look at me, look at me. Well, this is where you turn on your IS and your digital IS for shooting video. Back into the Q menu because it turned off on me, that's to go back. Auto white balance, picture style, creative filters we don't use, and subject detection. So take off the cap again, and you can see it's just gonna do the same thing. It's now, instead of stills, we are gonna be able to shoot video and focus on what we need to focus on. So pretty self-explanatory, pretty easy to get a hold of. But yeah, I mean, we've really covered a lot up to this point, and the next thing that I wanna cover is image review. So looking at the images and cycling through and showing you the different info screens. Let me jump back in here and say, are you looking to buy any new or used camera gear or accessories or lenses or anything? Check out allenscamera.com/fro. They're a mom and pop store that has supported me since day one, and I continue to support them. They've been around for over 40 years, and they can help you find any new, used, old lenses, trade in stuff, buy new stuff. Check them out at allenscamera.com/fro and let them know that the Fro sent you. So now I went ahead and hit the playback button. This is how we review our images. You can do it on the LCD screen, or you can put your eye up to the viewfinder, and that way you can put your eye in there and see it much brighter and clearer. I love putting my eye up to the EVF. The red box is showing us that that's where the focus was, and I went to a little wider here, and you can see that the focus shifted, and I'm just using the arrows to cycle through. You could pinch and zoom, you could swipe through. It's just easier to hit the buttons here. Now, if I wanted to skip 10 images, I just go ahead and turn this top dial, and it's gonna jump 10 images at a clip. So every time I turn this, it's jumping 10 images. So you can see that. We come out of here. If I hit the info button, the different info comes up on the screen showing me that this is photo 16 of 67 on the card. It says that it's 1/20th of a second at f6.3, ISO 1000, that it's RAW as well as JPEG fine. So we have all of that information there. And then you have a screen that shows you the histogram as well. For those who don't know, the histogram is a representation of your exposure. Sometimes if you're in a bright area, it might be thrown off, or a dark area, it might be skewed one side or the other, but it does give you, you're kind of looking for the peak, the value, like a little mountain in the middle is showing you that that is the proper exposure. I personally don't use it myself. Steven uses it a lot for video, and it's personal choice. It's your camera, it's your choice once again, so you could decide if that's the right tool for you. Let me hit info again, and it takes us back out, and we just cycle through because I turned off those other features. If we wanted to delete the image, we would hit Oscar the Grouch, but I'm not gonna delete it at this point. Now to zoom in, I'm gonna use the checkerboard option, and we are zooming right in. If I wanna zoom in further, I'm gonna turn this top dial, and we are now zooming in on the image. Boom, boom, boom. And that's how far you can see. And then you can move around by touching the screen, or you can move around with the joystick, and then we can press the joystick in the middle to take us back out. We could also press the joystick in to get into the zoom option without having to hit this little checkerboard over here. And the same exact thing applies when you're shooting video. Now I wanna get to, let me hit info again. I wanna get to a vertical image. That's a vertical image. Do you see how it's not rotated right now? So we would have to rotate our camera to look at this vertically, which is what I prefer to do because it's using the entire viewfinder or the entire LCD. Whereas if we just had it for rotating on the camera, then it would just show us this little portion right here of the screen, which kind of defeats the purpose for me. So this works. Hey, look, it's Steven. This works exactly the same for going through your video clips. You would just hit the OK button to play the video clip back. And that's really it for walking you through the playback menu. So yeah, very long video, but if you got this far, hashtag got this far down below in the comments to let me know that you did get this far. Also, if you want to subscribe, now would be a good time to hit that subscribe button to check out future videos and also go through the over 3,000 plus videos that I have done over the last 12 plus years. So this video was meant to give you a good starting point for setting up your R10. Did I go through every little nuance? No, there's always gonna be more things that you can learn, but I think this is giving you the best start possible for how you can set the camera and get out there and start shooting. So I hope you enjoyed this. Let me know if you have any questions down below. Again, hit the thumbs up, hit the subscribe. If you want an I Shoot Raw shirt, please pick up an I Shoot Raw shirt at store.fronosphoto.com. Or if you want to pick up those awesome presets because you're new to editing your RAW files, it's really going to help you out when you go to edit your R10 RAW files to give you a great starting point and to help you speed up your RAW workflow because you're brand new. That's what I have to say, guys. Thank you very much for watching. Jared, PolinFronosPhoto.com. See ya.